But this is a November 1950 broadcaster. It's owned by Brad Paisley. And when I told him I was going to do this video with you, Mike, he said, well, here, take this broadcaster and show it to Mike.
Pause. I'm freaking out. Like, what is happening? How in the world did I end up with Brad Paisley's actual 1950 broadcaster in my hands? Well, it's kind of a long story that actually starts with this guitar right here. So let me explain. You see, a couple months ago, Fender dropped this line of guitars called the Player 2 mods, and I was really excited to try one because I had never experienced that line before. It had been years since I had gone down the rabbit hole with their Mexican series of guitars, so I had wondered what changes they had made. So when it got here and I started to unbox it and play it for the first time, I began to take notice of a lot of the individual factors that they seem to have added. Noiseless pickups, locking tuners, a lot of the aspects that I've noticed them incorporate in some of their more modern style guitars. Basically, it felt like Fender was splitting their Mexican series into two distinct categories. The Player series for the fans of their more modern style guitars, and this other series that they seem to be calling the Vintera 2 for those people who wanted the more vintage era specs. Now, I had remembered when they had originally dropped that series way back in 2023, but hadn't taken my official shot with it until almost 2 years later when I first saw this blonde Tele style guitar. And it looked so clean. It had this black pickguard and this very classic, timeless look, so I thought it would be the perfect entrance into this series. There's just one small problem. One tiny thing that seemed to be confusing me. Whenever I looked it up, where it usually said Fender 50s Telecaster when describing the guitar, it said this word, Nocaster. Now, I had no idea what in the world that even meant. What even is a Nocaster, and what would make it different from your average run-of-the-mill Tele? And why do people want these more vintage spec Teles? All of these questions rang in my head, and I wondered where I was even going to get any answers. I knew I was going to have to ask like a real Tele player, and that's where it hit me. See, a couple months ago, I got to see one of my heroes, Brad Paisley, one of the first country players who really ever inspired me, up close. And while he was slinging these insane licks, there happened to be a player right next to him who was also playing these just out of this world solos. And I thought to myself, if anyone would know anything about the world of Teles, well, it would have to be that guy, right?
My dad bought an album for me, and it was by Emmylou Harris, and the album was called Luxury Liner. And I bought the album, and I pulled open the jacket, and it had a picture of Albert Lee holding a 53 Telecaster, and I just thought, that's cool. And I hadn't even heard the album yet, because of course it was on vinyl, and I had to get home to hear it. And so I remember, putting the needle down on the record and hearing his playing on there, and I was like, at that point, I was like, I want a Telecaster. I want one bad. And it was
like... So this is Zac Childs, and let's just say when it comes to questions about Teles in Nashville, he's the guy who's gonna have the answers. What is it about these old school spec Teles that Nashville players really gravitate towards?
I think they have a certain, sound. It's like as soon as you start putting more modern hardware, which basically means heavier hardware.
Okay.
Heavier tuners. When you change the mass, it changes the sound. And there's a thing to this lightweight bridge and the brass saddles and the lightweight Kluson style machine heads, that there's a doinkiness to it.
Who are the guys in your mind that really shaped what we think of as the Tele sound?
I think first would be James Burton.
Okay.
So James, his parents bought him a Telecaster when he was 13 years old, and this was in 1952. So in 1952, he got a brand new Telecaster that his parents bought him, and then he proceeded to really define a lot of the ways in which the Telecaster is played. And also, he was a huge influence on the creation of light gauge strings. So before James, And there were some other guys that were experimenting with this. Your strings were pretty heavy, and you didn't have an unwound third string, so it was wound, and so that was really hard to bend.
When I started playing, coming from the Stevie Ray Vaughan world of like, people are gonna make fun of you if they know you're not putting 11s or 12s on there.
Right.
And then
Right.
coming to Nashville, and everyone's like, why would I do that?
Yeah. There's advantages to heavy strings have a bounce to it, because when you hit the string, it has so much tension and fight that the pick kind of comes back up. And so there's a feel to heavier strings, which is great, and it has a sound. But also there's a feel where you kind of more strike through the lighter gauge strings with the pick, and it just has and just the pliability of it and the funkiness.
So in terms of just the Nashville scene, who are the tele players that really stick out to you?
That would be the guys that brought the Telecaster to Nashville were guys like Billy Sanford and Fred Carter Jr., and they were Shreveport, Louisiana guys that were friends with James Burton and Roy Buchanan, and they moved here, and Nashville was not a Telecaster place at all. It was much, they were much more into Gibson Epiphones, Gretches, things of that sort, and a fatter neck pickup sound. And so these guys came up from Louisiana that were as into blues and R&B music as they were into country. They were very, they weren't just straight country guys or jazz players. These guys were into blues and Lightnin' Hopkins and things like that, and into Hank Williams Sr. And these guys came up and they played the Telecaster on the back pickup and with light gauge strings, and they kind of brought that sound to Nashville. And as the sound became popular, because at first it was considered kind of like greasy kid music or whatever, or it's like they're playing rock and roll because they were playing on the back pickup, because they weren't doing, they weren't doing something like that. Instead, they were going, doing something more of that ilk.
Yeah.
They were seen as rock and roll or whatever, and so they started popularizing the Telecaster in Nashville. So Billy Sanford and Fred Carter Jr. And then a guy came in from Memphis named Reggie Young, who he played a Tele quite a bit.
Could you explain to me what a Nocaster is?
Great question. I love this. So, Fender in the late 1940s, they got inspired by a number of things to create a solid body guitar. So one of the influences was a guy named Paul Bigsby that, of course, is famous for making the Bigsby Vibrola.
Yeah.
But he was a very famous guitar builder, like a custom guitar builder, and he made like early pedal steels, and he made solid body guitars. In fact, he made this instrument for Merle Travis that was solid body, single cutaway, and it had the Strat headstock on it. Okay.
Yeah.
And Leo borrowed that guitar, and between his experiments, his making lap steels and all this stuff, he starts working on making his own Fender, streamlined solid body guitar, because the Bigsby guitar was like really fancy. Okay. I mean, it had all sorts of crazy woods on it and was very labor intensive. The wood was very carved and ornate. And so Leo wanted to make something that was like that, but was more like the Henry Ford, like streamlined, let's be able to make it kind of quick and affordable for people. So he, at first it's going to be called the Esquire, and he ends up having trouble with the necks because he doesn't want to spend the money to put a truss rod in the neck.
Really?
Okay. Yeah. Well, they ended up going to the kind of the early NAMM show. That I think it was in Chicago at this point, and 2 or 3 of the necks that were out there ended up warping at the show. And so they looked really bad in front of the other professionals, the other manufacturers, and, the elite, musicians that were at a NAMM type show.
Yeah.
So they decided, okay, we have to put a truss rod in it. And so they quickly came up with the name Broadcaster because it had to do kind of with radio, radio broadcasting and, a broadcaster. But they didn't do their due diligence, because whenever you're going to name a product, you have to do a trademark search. Now, we have the internet now.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have the advantage of we can get online and we can do a trademark search of a name, before we sell a product. But back then, you really needed to hire an attorney, which costs a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And you needed to have them do a full-on trademark search, which meant some clerk went down to the trademark office and looked through a bunch of paper files.
Yeah.
So they didn't do that. Fender didn't pay for that. They just came up with the name Broadcaster. They put it on the guitar. They, have decals made up. They have marketing made up. They have ads put in magazines. And the guitar is released in October of 1950. Okay? By January, February of 51, they get what's called a cease and desist order from Gretsch, because Gretsch had a trademark, legal protection for their name Broadcaster. Okay, and they were using it mainly on drum sets, but I think they ended up using it on a lot of other things too. So what that meant is that Fender either had to cease using the name, or they had to go to court and try to prove something, but they didn't want it. They knew that they were in the wrong. And so in, I think, February of 1951, they stopped using the Broadcaster name, and they immediately came up with the name Telecaster. Okay?
Interesting.
But they had a ton of decals that said Fender Broadcaster on them. Like this. This is a real, 1950 Broadcaster. And so they had, tons of these logos.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a November 1950 Broadcaster. It's owned by Brad Paisley. And when I told him I was going to do this video with you, Mike, he said, well, here, take this Broadcaster and show it to Mike. And because he met you, at the Fender event that we did back in May, that, it was so nice to meet you. And, this is a guitar that Brad's only owned for a couple of months, and he did a bunch of swapping with a collector down in Florida. And this is a really rare guitar because, there weren't that many Broadcasters made. They were only made, October, November, December, January, February. Yeah, so you've got 5 months that these were made. And so there was only, they think around 200, 250 of these made total. And and then, of course, fires and floods and all course of things happen. And so there keeps being less of them. But, this is the first, this is when Fender, put a truss rod in the neck, and they were really, getting their feet off the ground, making, to me, the most important, solid body guitar of all time, the Broadcaster, which becomes the Nocaster and then becomes the Telecaster. And this is a really great one. This one is really light, which, I'm a big fan of light tellies. This one's probably a little over 6.5 pounds. And I'm pretty sure it's a one-piece body, which is also kind of fun. And and it just, it feels great. It's already been refretted with bigger frets. And, it's just so fun seeing, Broadcaster, there on the headstock. So Fender never sold a Nocaster in 1951. They were Telecasters, but they just didn't say Telecaster on them. So when you looked at the price guide in 1951, it would have said Telecaster. But when the instrument showed up, at the music store, it would just say Fender on there. And so the name Nocaster was created much later by collectors. So no one used the name Nocaster in 1951. It was just a Telecaster.
Interesting.
And so finally Fender ran out of those old logos that they had clipped off, and then they were able to start using the Telecaster logos in late 51, early 52. The Broadcaster did not have a true tone control. It had a blend control that in the back position, all the way up was the bridge pickup by itself. And as you turned this down, it blended in the neck pickup. And so, and just to go through what the wiring was, this position is the neck pickup through a cap and a resistor, and it has really low output and it's really dark.
Really?
And so earlier I was kind of playing like some rhythm guitar where it sounds like this. And that's what that sound was. And it was for playing that type of rhythm.
Yeah.
That kind of, and then this position, the middle position, is actually this pickup by itself.
Because that's what I was going to ask. Because if this is a blend control and you're turning it all the way up to be both of those two, what would the middle actually be?
Then it's the neck pickup by itself without not going through the cap and resistor. I'm not sure how this guitar is wired up.
Yeah, we'll have to see with this guy.
So we need to check that out. But I guess the point is that a Nocaster could have been wired either way.
So at the end of the day, what did we learn? And what's the moral of this whole big story? And I think it has to do with a lot of the time when I get the opportunity to experience a new guitar, it's all about learning it in the moment. And I'm comparing it to the past models that I've played before. But one of the things I tend to overlook a lot is the history behind it. And that can come from so many different places, from just researching it online to actually getting a friend or a mentor who knows it a little bit better to explain it to me. And this guitar right here is absolutely no exception. As someone who's been playing teles for a couple years now, it was really cool to hear some of these stories about not just what Leo was thinking when he built the guitar, but the actual process of how we got from the Esquire to the Broadcaster to the Nocaster to the Telecaster and how we view it today. And I think the coolest thing about the guitar journey going forward is to see what other guitars we can do that with. The Strat, the Les Paul, maybe even a Gibson Explorer, but I don't think it matters what I think. What matters is what you think. So please let me know. Did you know the history behind the Broadcaster, the Nocaster? What's your favorite Tele of all time? Let me know in the comments. Anyways, thank you so much for watching this video, and the biggest thank you of all to Zac Childs for not only taking the time to be able to do this video with me, but just really taking the time to explain everything about the history behind these guitars. One of my favorite videos that I've ever made on this channel, and one of the nicest people I've met. Also, thank you so much to Brad Paisley for just letting us use his guitar and for just taking the time to talk to me last month. That meant the world. But if you want to know anything more about the Vintera 50s Nocaster, I'll have all the links in the description. Make sure to check it out. One of the best ways to support the channel, if that's something you want to do, or if you're just curious about any of the other gear that I use in this video, make sure to check out those links. Thank you so much to all of my patrons. There's some extra exclusive content on there if you want to join the community. Like and subscribe if you had a good time. Most importantly, most important of all, have a fantastic night.